Jeannie Constantino. Thank you so much for joining us. And want to start off with a few housekeeping notes before I introduce you to our guest today. For those of you that have been with us before, you've probably heard me say these things. First off, we are recording this. So in about a week, we will put this up and you can watch it again, get together with friends, watch it, get together with your parish, watch it, and discuss it and continue the conversation. We also have the ability for you to ask questions during this webinar. So if you scroll to the bottom of your screen there, you'll see some stuff pops up and you see the little Q&A box there. That will allow you to ask questions throughout the presentation. So if you want to ask a question, just type it on over to us. We don't know how many questions we're going to get, so we may not get to them all. We'll do the best that we can to get to all your questions, but we look forward to hearing from you with this. Of course, we always want to be thankful to Leadership 100. It is through their constant support and the support of the faithful stewards of our archdiocese that allow things like this to occur. So we thank you all for your support with this. And now let me introduce you a little bit to Dr. Jeannie Constantino. She is a professor at the University of San Diego since, I believe, 2002.
That's correct.
And where she teaches biblical studies and church history there. Also, she taught New Testament at Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School of Theology. And I got to know Presitera through her wonderful podcast, Searching the Scripture on Ancient Faith Radio. I'm only through Genesis, but I've gotten all that, all the background that you've given, and I found it so informative and really enjoying it quite a bit. But she also, as well as all the archives that she also has a live version that broadcasts Monday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, which I believe allows people to call in with questions and stuff. So I highly recommend you all check that out. She is such a resource, and we are just so blessed to have her with us today to discuss this topic of introducing the children to our Bible. And as we get started here, I think that we hear a lot about, as parents, what we need to do. We bring our children to church. We participate in the sacraments. And, I feel like we don't talk enough about how important reading the Bible outside of the Sunday liturgy is important to our families. Can you tell us a little bit about that and why it is so important?
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me and for inviting me to participate in this webinar. It's great. And I think I want to congratulate you and the work you're doing in the Archdiocese. And I think it's a wonderful resource for people. So I'd like to thank you for that. And of course, Leadership 100, as you said. Okay, why is the Bible important? Well, if you really think about how many influences our children have, how many hours they spend in front of the television, with their phones, with music, and in school, and there's so little time devoted to God, the more time that we can connect them to the spiritual life, and one of the most important ways, of course, is reading the Bible, the more we need to do that. So it's very useful in their spiritual formation. All of the fathers talk about how important it is to read the Bible. That's part of our Orthodox tradition. Sometimes we think that's Protestant, but really it is part of our Orthodox tradition. It was the Orthodox Church that began to translate the Bible in the other languages very early on, before there was even an Orthodox Church as something separate from Catholic. There was they translated the Bible into Coptic, into Armenian, into Syriac, and other ancient languages. So it was always part of the mission of the church for people, ordinary people, to read the Bible. And St. John Chrysostom said that reading the Bible sanctifies you. It attracts the grace of the Holy Spirit. Just as we know how other types of media really affect us negatively, in the sense that they are attracting us towards sin, introducing the wrong ideas into our head. So clearly, reading the Bible is something helpful for the spiritual life. So that's why we do need to read it.
Wonderful. You know, and it's interesting to me. And one of my favorite quotes that I heard from Christendom, and I'm just saying it off the top of my head, so I'm not get it right. But I remember him writing, you know, children need a lot of repetition in stories. They need to hear stories again and again. And this really resonated with me because I've done my degree work in child development.
There you go.
And I realized how important repetition for children is. And I feel like we have a lot for really young children. There's all the colorful books, the stories of Noah's Ark, of you know, Moses, all these stories that we tell our children when they're really young. But how do we transition those stories to some of the realities? Like Noah's Ark, it's a cute story for little kids, but then it's really not that cute of a story when you look at the reality of what's happening. How do we transition our children to a more mature understanding and read it with older kids?
Okay. Yeah, that's a really good point, because I always laugh about that myself, because I teach the Bible to college students, and a lot of them, we try to hit all the important stories, and one of them is something like David and Goliath, where at the end of the story, David cuts Goliath's head off, right? So I always find that kind of funny, and I make a joke about it in class, because almost all of them have heard of David and Goliath, and they hear it from these children's stories. So the reality is a lot bloodier, a lot more violent. Here's what I would say. I agree with you that with younger children, it's easy. They have the little Bible stories. And I also want to go back to what you're saying about repetition. Very important. The Greeks have a saying, repetition is the mother of learning. So what we can do with the stories, first of all, children just knowing the story, sometimes with the real little ones, that's enough. With the older children, we can start engaging them. Why is this important? What did we learn from the story? It can be the same story. And it doesn't mean that you have to go to the part where the head gets cut off or all the people die because they weren't in the ark or something like this. And the question is, even with something with Noah's Ark, that is the reality. What about the people who weren't on the ark? So the animals, and it's a cutesy thing for little kids. For older children, why didn't people get onto the ark? What does this mean about us? For us, what is the ark? The ark is the church. The ark is a place where we're safe. The church is a place where we're safe. So we can still give the lesson of the story to older children, just as Christendom preached on that. You said you listened to the lessons on Genesis. Christendom is preaching to an audience of adults. What are the lessons of Noah's Ark? It's trust in God. You know, respond to the call of God, things like this. So I think that these are things that we can transition from younger children to school-age children to then into teenagers. And I think things start to get a little bit stickier when we get into the teenage years and the difficult questions that they ask.
Mm-hmm. And that with the difficult questions and transitioning into those because quite frankly, I've had young kids ask real difficult questions.
That's true. They can. Sometimes they ask really interesting questions.
It is. It's interesting to try to figure out. I think as parents, sometimes we feel the need to have the answers for our kids and stuff. And we want to answer things. And I feel like sometimes we have a little hesitation when it comes to reading the Bible because
you're afraid of
overwhelmed with what questions our kids are going to ask. How do we combat that?
That's a very good question, and understandable. So we don't want to avoid reading the Bible because we're not sure what kind of questions they're going to ask us. I think that it's important, first of all, that we are honest with our children, that we don't know all the answers to everything. Nobody does. And just as like they might ask you a question about something in medicine or science or something, we don't know the answers to everything, but that doesn't mean there aren't good answers to our questions. So what we could say was, let's think about that. Let's see if we can find out the answer to that question. And sometimes when you ask someone or you look for an answer, you find out it's not as complicated or as difficult. Going back to the difficult stories, first of all, or the difficult issues, I don't think there's anything wrong with avoiding them. I don't think we have to tell the little children the whole story of giving the example there for David and Goliath. We know what is age appropriate for our children, and I think it's okay to tailor what you're doing with them to that age. And in most of the Bible storybooks, they're not bringing up those kinds of issues. Okay, that's one thing. The other thing is when there is a question, even something like a gospel reading. Let's take the gospel reading that we sometimes hear in church, where Jesus, what about the pigs? We hear that story that all the pigs go running down the hill and they're all destroyed, Well, isn't that terrible for the pig farmers? Why is that story in the Bible? That's a kind of good question. Well, it's to show us the destructive power of the demons, that they want to destroy us. They were trying to destroy the man, so we have to protect ourselves. How do we protect ourselves from evil? By making the sign of the cross. When we're afraid, what do? We make the sign of the cross. By receiving the sacraments, by going to confession, by going to church, things like that, by saying our prayers. So we can use even those difficult questions to reinforce what we're doing with our children at home. The other thing we can do is if it's we could ask our priest, what about that? The priest would love it if you called him up to talk about the Bible or invited him to your house to bless your house. And you have a list of questions. Father, we read these stories and these are some of the questions we had. And rather than calling him up to talk about, Father, I don't agree with what you said, or we charge too much for the souvlaki plate at church or something like this. Call him up and invite him as a family to come and bless your house. When was the last time the priest came to your house and blessed your house? Got to know your family. We also have all kinds of different resources, like, for example, on Ancient Faith Radio, you mentioned my podcast. But in addition to that, there's a podcast on Sunday nights called Orthodoxy Live. And Father Evan Armitage, who's a Greek Orthodox priest, takes questions on every subject. And you can email him or you can call in and say, Father, why did Jesus send the demons into the pigs? Or why did he call the lady, why did he say it's not right to give the children's food to the dogs? Something like this. Was he calling her a dog? But these are kind of difficult questions. So we have resources now. So it's not, but it does take a little bit of effort possibly in your part as a parent. But that doesn't mean it's not worth it. And you learn something too. Yeah. So that's a bit of a long answer. But I don't want to discourage people from reading the Bible because they're afraid they would be asked a question they can't answer. Don't be afraid. First of all, say, you know what? I'm not sure. Let's think about that. And you know what? I will bet most of the time you will come up with the answer. It's that anxiety that you get that you don't have the right answer, that maybe you think you can't really answer that, but I will bet you anything that most of the time you're going to come up with the answer on your own. Mm-hmm. And if you're not sure, we do have your parish priest. Please don't call him up at home on his day off or take him up or call him, wait for him after church too, when everybody wants to talk to Father. You know what I'm trying to say? There are appropriate times to have that discussion, or there's a parish Bible study, or you can email him and say, Father, I have a quick question. When you have child, would you answer? We had this question. This came up at our home. You can do that too. Most priests will be very responsive to something like that. But don't be afraid, because I really believe that people have more knowledge or more common sense understanding than they really give themselves credit for.
Yeah. It's interesting, as you're saying this, I was reminded of when I was younger. I decided I was going to start with Genesis.
Yes.
All the way through the Bible. And having just kind of graduated from college,
I'm laughing. Yes.
I had my notebook with me next to me when I was reading the Bible. And I got through Genesis and I called my spiritual father because I had about 10 pages of notes of things I didn't understand and I had questions about. And I said, Father, I've got all these notes and I need to talk to you about this. And he said, you may ask me 3 and then go on to the next book and stuff. Because it was this understanding like of saying
Yes.
we don't have to have every answer.
That's right.
That's not, we
That's
don't
right.
read the Bible like we read a book that we're studying for school. Could you
Right.
talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think that that's a really good point. Here's why. The Bible is complicated. It's not easy to understand. And you can tell this to your children. They don't have to have the answers to everything. I don't have the answers to everything. Okay? So what do we say to our children? First of all, what did the fathers say about this? They said that there's a lot of the understanding of the Bible lies very, very, very deep. And it's like, and we have to learn how to uncover this like a miner. Chrysostom uses this explanation a lot. It's like you're searching for gold. Well, you can't really do that with your bare hands. You need to have the tools to do that. But that doesn't mean that you're not going to find useful things on the surface. So the Bible is written in a way that we can always learn something from it. We may not understand everything because it's complicated and it's deep and it's spiritual. And part of our ability to understand it has to do with our spiritual life. The more spiritual you are, the more you pray, the more you understand it, interestingly enough. Because it's not like a regular book, like you mentioned. It's not like a school book that everything is on the surface and easy to understand. Because God wants us to search the scriptures, which is the name of my podcast, as you mentioned. So there's always some lesson we can take away. There's always something for us to understand. Mm. And for what we don't understand, they say to pray about it or to think about it. Or like I said, make a little list. You could have a little notebook where you write down your questions. I had a notebook of questions when I was growing up. It's very similar. And sometimes I had a running list. And whenever I would meet a priest, I would ask him questions. Father, why do we do this? Father, why do we believe that? And so we can have our questions. And as long as children understand that there are good answers to the questions, even if we don't know everything, that it's okay for us not to know everything. Mm-hmm. Because the scriptures are deep. We don't understand God. How are we going to understand the Bible, which is about God? Mm-hmm. So it's okay for us to grow, just as they are. You know, I remember my little niece. She was in high school. She was struggling with algebra or something like this. And I said, you can do it. It's just going to take time. I said, remember when you were, in first grade or second grade? She kind of rolled her eyes and she said, well, that was easy. I said, that's easy for you now, but it wasn't easy for you then. So there are things that we understand now. And if we continue to work on our understanding of the Bible, we will grow in our understanding. And then we'll say, well, people say to me, oh my gosh, well, you know all this. I wasn't born knowing this. This is something I learned over time. And there are still things I don't know. Mm-hmm. So just as you are growing in your spiritual life and understanding, and we're all at different levels, it's okay for us not to know everything all at once. So just don't stop. Just don't stop. Don't give up.
We have a few questions coming in here.
Great.
So we have one that says, there are some more mature sections of the Bible, even for middle school children. Our daughter, 11, has interest in reading the Bible. Yes. My thoughts were to stick to the gospel and go through Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, as Father Thomas Hopko suggested. What are your thoughts here?
Okay. I'm glad you brought that up, because you just mentioned to me that you started by reading the Bible and you decided you were going to read it all the way through. That's very difficult. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's a bad thing to do at some point in your adult life, as long as you realize there's a whole lot you're not going to understand. There's a couple reasons why just reading the Bible all the way through is problematic. Because first of all, once you get, like, let's say past Deuteronomy, you get into parts where there's a lot of violence. And this is very disturbing for people, especially for modern people, because it's a very primitive culture. You get into Joshua where they're killing each other. This is very difficult for people. So I don't recommend that unless you're really prepared for what you're going to read. So that's kind of challenging. I don't know that I would discourage a child who wants to read the Bible, but I do think the New Testament is much better than starting with Genesis and reading through. The Old Testament is also not in chronological order, so you have no idea what's going on half the time. You don't understand why the prophets are prophesying. you know, what's going on. They're talking about adultery and things like this, and they're talking about really idolatry. So I don't know that without any instruction, it's all that useful to just read straight through the Old Testament. It sometimes creates more problems than it resolves. You do need some guidance. So I do think that Gospels are the best place to start. They're pretty straightforward, and sticking with the New Testament is probably the best idea. I would agree with that with Father Hopka. Go through the Gospels and then the epistles of Paul. When you get to Revelation, you can read it, but just figure that you're not going to understand it. That's a special case. But the rest of it is pretty understandable. The other thing I would say is what's very important is the version that we're using or the translation that we're using. Now, somebody, as a teenager even, I wasn't reading a regular Bible. I was reading the Good News for Modern Man, which is really not a translation, but it's easy to understand. Today, I'm not so sure that I would recommend that, but a regular Bible, even like your Orthodox Study Bible, is not easy to understand. So I'm not sure how much the child, an 11 or 12-year-old, will comprehend it. It might be better to give them the Orthodox Study Bible, which at least has some notes and some chapters which introduce what they're reading, rather than giving them something that's a paraphrase. Paraphrases are very popular today. Mm-hmm. Paraphrases like The Message, which is really somebody just restating the Bible. I don't know that that's a good idea. But I think that probably starting with the New Testament is better than the Old Testament.
Which kind of goes right into the next question we had. Which kids' Bibles do you recommend? Do you have ones that you recommend? And if the list is too long, we could email that out or do something like that. Or
here's what I have. And I don't think that there's usually anything wrong with any Bible storybook. Usually they're going to be very basic. I would just want to show you. I still have this from my Sunday school days where they gave us this little Bible. Okay. Oh, this is my sister's. Sunday school gave us this little Bible, okay, which is King James Version, and we liked it because there was a zipper, and we liked to zip it up and unzip it. We thought that was cool, but we couldn't read it because it's the King James Version and it's incomprehensible. So if you're with Sunday school or something, don't give kids Bibles if there's something they can't understand. Of course, we didn't have the Orthodox Study Bible. There are toddlers' Bibles, okay, which are really, really simple. Look at this, really super simple, very easy. Well, here's one about the Annunciation. Okay, so this is fine. There's nothing wrong with it. 1 minute Bible stories, okay, something like this, fine. We have also the Greek Archdiocese has an Orthodox with Orthodox kind of style illustrations Bible storybook, which is very nice. And there's an e-version. You can put it on a tablet and you can click on it and choose the stories you want to talk about. That's another way. And I think that's good for sort of middle grades and even for high school. There's nothing wrong with that. And it'll also has an audio that you can listen to it being read, or you could buy a hard version. So I don't have any specific recommendations that one Bible or Bible storybook is better than another. I do think it's nice to use an Orthodox source if you have it. Mm-hmm. So I would recommend that.
So for somebody specifically asked for like high school and middle school, Sunday school, would you lean towards the Orthodox Study Bible for recommending?
I think so, because at least you know. So remember, some of them are New Testament only. That's this one. And some of them are the whole Bible. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I do like that, even though it's not always easy to understand, is because at least you're going to have chapters at the beginning which explain things to you, or there'll be some notes that will give you some explanation, some church context. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't always agree with everything that's in the notes, but remember, and you should tell people that the notes are somebody's opinion. The notes are not part of the Bible. Okay, but at least it's giving you something that is going to present the Bible in an Orthodox context. Mm-hmm. So I do think that that's very important. Oh, but here's something else. Here's what's the picture Bible. here's the Bible in, this is like a comic book version. And that's okay. This is just the story. Here's a story of, I don't know, is that, I'm not quite sure who it is. Okay. So you got something like a David and Goliath story or whatever. And here it is in comic book style. They're just learning the stories. There's nothing specifically theological in here. So if you have a team and they want to read the book, this is okay, because what we're trying to get them to learn is the lesson of the story. So there's nothing wrong with that. I don't specifically recommend any particular Bible. As long as you're reading the Bible, I think it's all right. And as long as, if they have questions that you can answer the question, that's okay. I don't have any particular recommendation. Maybe that was too long of an answer.
Are there any study resources that would be excellent for middle school age children?
This is something that the Archdiocese has put out, called A Lamp Unto My Feet. I do think that once they start to get a little bit older, that it's good for them to have some basic understanding of the Bible. And I know that what they get at church is sort of patchy. We never know. Sometimes there might be a church school that's very effective. Another parish may have a really tiny parish where there's almost nothing for the kids. We've had parishes where we had excellent church schools and parishes where we had literally, 5 or 6 children of various ages, and there's not much you can do there. This is put out by the Greek Archdiocese, A Lamp Unto My Feet. There's also a parent's guide, and it explains to middle school and high school kids what is the Bible, what's the Old Testament, what's the New Testament. And I think they should know this. And this is something that you should be discussing with your kids, so that at least they have the basics. What's the Old Testament? When I lift this up, where am I going to find the Gospels? Here, this is the New Testament. It's going to be at the beginning. But if I take this Bible, it's the whole Bible. Where am I going to find the Gospels? I'm not going to find them at the beginning. I'm going to find them toward the end, because it's the Old and New Testament. If I want to read about Jesus, where am I going to find those stories? In the Gospels. They should know that this is very, very basic Bible literacy. These are things that you can talk to your kids about, and you should. Let them open the Bible. Let them find the reading. When you're sitting down as a family, if you're going to do that. So, listen, I know that parents are very, very busy. You're running, and there's all these activities, and you have a job, and you've got your house, and so many responsibilities. I don't want people to feel like this is another burden on them or more stress. But we do have to think about making this a priority the way we make other things in our children's lives a priority, because this is for eternity. We make sure their children go to school. We see that they go to the doctor. They have music lessons. They have sports and all these other things. And because we think we need to prepare them for life. That's true. But this is really a very important part of life. So whatever you can do, it's better than nothing. Okay? So for parents out there, I just want to encourage you to talk to your kids, talk about the Bible, even if it's once a week, you have a little bit of time together as a family, or that you talk about the sermon on the way home from church. Do you remember what the Bible reading was? What was it? It was the story of thus and such, Zacchaeus or something. Well, what's this message of that story? Talk to them about it, because if you don't, who will? Mm-hmm. And I can't express enough the fact that what we're trying to do is give our children a foundation, a strong foundation for their life. Because, I know people who they don't come to church because their kids have sports. And, I understand this. On one case, maybe I'm getting off topic here a little bit, but in one case I said to she was actually our Sunday school director, and sometimes she would miss Sundays because her kid was, I said, did you ever ask them not to have tournaments on Sunday mornings? No, we never asked. Well, why not? And so once she did, they stopped having the tournaments on Sunday mornings, So we have to be a little bit proactive and making sure that this is very important in a children's life, because our children are going to face in their life divorces, death, job loss, bankruptcy, illnesses. How are they going to face these things if they don't have a spiritual foundation? Now, everybody who's listening to this webinar is listening because you care about these things, but I just want to encourage you that this is so important that they have this, because their trophy that they got from soccer is not going to help them through those difficult times. It's their relationship with the church, with the Lord, that's going to be there for them, that's going to prepare them for eternity. And so this is really what we want for our kids, right? So I just want to encourage parents, in spite of the fact that you have so many things, try to carve out a little bit of time for this, because it's really, really important. Any way you do it, as much as you can do. So don't just stop when they're toddlers at bedtime. You can continue. Children, especially teenagers, really have these questions, and sometimes they're struggling with doubt. You've got to give them these tools and these anchors before they go to college too, where they're really going to be challenged. Mm-hmm. So I'm sorry I talked a long time there.
No, absolutely. And I'm seeing a lot of people are sending a lot of resources and stuff. And different things. We're going to put a list together to send out to everybody. And there was one final question, though, that we're not going to be able to get to all the questions, but one of the questions I thought was kind of interesting. It was just about having a particular copy of a kid's Bible. Yes. And how do you deal with things like this? What it says in it, Mary was in love with Joseph, a carpenter.
Oh. I wouldn't use that one. I wouldn't use that one. Oh, absolutely. Oh, well, I'm really glad you mentioned that. I'm sorry, the trash people are passing by to pick up the trash. I'm sorry. You might be hearing some noise in the background. Sorry about that. Okay. When I said, look, most children's Bibles are not presenting it like that, but I would take it back. I would not use it, and I would absolutely not use that, or take that page out if you still want to keep the book. That's totally wrong. So, oh my gosh, I've never come across that. Yeah. Mary was in love with Joseph. I've absolutely never come across that. That's a distortion of the Bible. So if you find that, it's okay for you to say this. If you happen to read it and you go, oh my gosh, it's okay for you to say this is wrong. Because what we're reading is what somebody is saying that the Bible's saying, and they're wrong.
And I think it could even be interesting, without going into great depth, depending how young the child is, to pull out the Orthodox Bible and let's see what it actually says. See, it doesn't say anything about that.
That's a very good point. But then you would have to really question almost everything else in that little Bible storybook. Yeah. That's a pretty egregious error. So I guess, you have to be cautious, but that's okay. I want to say it's good also to have your children memorize Bible verses. I think this is very important. As Orthodox Christians, we weren't really taught this, but I think it's nice, because these are the things they're going to remember. There are always favorite Bible verses if you come across one, or if your children do. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. That's a really powerful verse, and it's something that you can memorize. You can say if you have your daily, your nightly dinner together as a family, you say your prayer over the meal. What's our Bible verse this week? Who can remember it? Let's say it all together. Say it until everybody memorizes it, and put it aside, but keep those and go through them. And this is, again, it's a little thing, but when your child is facing something difficult, and this comes to their mind, I can do all things through Christ. That's very powerful. So this is a very little thing. Seek first the kingdom of heaven and its righteousness, and everything else will be added to you. Another thing are what we do in the car, what we talk to our children about in the car after school. We have the daily Bible readings. It's an app for the GoArch, the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese daily Bible readings. You have The Path on Ancient Faith Radio, which is the daily Bible readings which are read out loud. Okay, the app on the Greek Archdiocese website comes up on your phone. How about that? before on the way to school, if you have nothing to talk about, or rather than talking about something inconsequential, let's hear the daily Bible reading, or why don't you pull it up on my phone? What's the Bible reading for today? These are little ways that we can incorporate the Bible into our daily lives, and it's important that we provide this foundation for our kids.
Wonderful. Thank you
What
very
else?
much. This has been really wonderful hearing from you, Jositetta. As we look at this a little bit closer, we will put together a resource list. We'll run it by you and find out what you want to add to it. We have some different resources. Some people here have shared some different resources that are out there. I'm looking at one more thing.
I want to, while you're looking at your one more thing, let me just sort of put something out there to be careful of. Also, sometimes we go to the internet. Now, it's nice to have in your house, if you have a question about something you read about the Bible, or maybe you don't have a question, just want to learn more. It's nice to have resources like this, something like this, a Bible. It's called a Bible handbook. Nice color pictures, articles. What is it like to do fishing? Jesus and the fishing, or what did a city look like? What did a temple look like? These kinds of things are nice to look up with your kids and provide some answers or explanations for. Sometimes this particular one is on each different books of the Bible, but sometimes they just have a lot of color pictures about life in Bible times, which is nice for your kids to look at and learn a little bit from and sort of put things in context. When you have a question, the internet is not always the best place to go for answers, particularly for theological questions, because you never know what you're going to get. So you have to be careful about that. I think most people who are listening to this webinar will understand that. I think it's also important for your children to understand that the Bible is understood through the church, that the church is what produced the Bible, and also that they shouldn't feel like there's a conflict between science and the Bible, things like this. It's important to introduce our children as they get older to more sophisticated concepts, so that they're not stuck thinking about God or spirituality as a really little child, as a very young child. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
I can say more unless you have a question.
No. Go right ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Here's why I'm saying this. Because for many adults, their religious concepts haven't evolved much. As we go through, we start with math, and you start with the very basics, and then you go up to more complex things. We're not really usually consistently doing this in our religious comprehension. Now, you studied child development, so you know. Very young children cannot understand abstract concepts. So it's okay for you to say, well, God is in the sky, and he's looking down on you, and he's taking care of you, and he loves you. That's fine. But once they get past to an older age where they can understand, you need to start replacing those things because I'm telling you, I actually had a college student telling me that God, is not an old man in the sky, and he felt like that's why he couldn't believe, because he couldn't believe that God is an old man in the sky. Well, that is so ridiculous, and this is why he's an agnostic now, because he has this conception of God that we don't have this idea of God. God is not an old man in the sky, but we have to sort of help our children to deepen their faith. What is heaven? Well, if it's a little child, okay, Yaya died, Grandma died, and she's in heaven, and she's happy there, and it's a beautiful place where birds are singing. Well, once they get to middle age and high school, then you have to say, well, what is heaven? It's not a place, it's our life with God. It's eternal life with God. Well, you have to start replacing these ideas with something deeper, because what happens is they go off to college and they get challenged by people. Well, the Bible, the earth is more than 5,000 years old, and they make Christianity, the Christian faith, sound like it's idiotic. Only you have to be stupid to believe in that. So we need to be able to prepare our children to have a more nuanced, a deeper understanding of their faith, so that when they go to college, they don't come back as an atheist, because that happens. Okay, so before I really encourage you, if you have teenagers, start to talk to them and tell them that there are people who are going to challenge them about their faith, and not to think that there aren't good answers to these things. They're going to be challenged about the virgin birth. All these things are all on YouTube. The virgin birth, the resurrection, the Bible, that's just a bunch of stories. These things never happened. This never happened. We have to be able to give our children responses to these things so that they're not under attack and feeling like they have no good answer, and that there is no good answer. Mm-hmm. So I just want you to realize that as they get older, the challenges increase, but we should be able to also prepare them. Let our children have answers before they're faced with these things, because these things are passed around. YouTube, read this, and let them know that there are good answers, and they're only getting one side. And often what they're being told is not true. Mm-hmm. About something like the virgin birth. Oh, it was just made up, because there's lots of stories of virgin births. I talk about this in my classes with the college students, because that's what they're told these days. Oh, this is just a legend. It was made up because they want to sell their religion. So we have to be, obviously we can't address all these things now, but I know that parents watching this webinar really care about these things. You need to be talking to your kids about this before they get into those teenage years, or as they're entering those teenage years, to prepare them so that they don't become scandalized or shocked by what they're going to hear out in the world.
Wonderful.
Any other other questions? I don't want to dominate. I want to hear the question.
Yeah, I think I have one more question that I want to just throw out there, as far as the idea of families reading the Bible together versus individual reading time and stuff. I know that was it the Christmas fast last year?
Yes.
We had some nice Bible readings that have been put together by Elisa Belichick in preparing for the birth of Christ. And we had been reading them as a family, and it provided so much time for discussion. And I wonder if reading the Bible as a family can also, as well as individual reading, even for sometimes older kids, I think.
Yes, I think it's better for older kids, especially. Yeah, I think that's fantastic. Yeah. So, you can have you can do this as a family, as part of a family night, which is really great to have. I do know families who would have, like, Friday night was for pizza and a movie or something. And you could do something like that, or Saturday night before church. And you can do something like that where you have a set time where you have these kinds of discussions, and they're very fruitful. And it's amazing how perceptive your kids can be.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much they absorb from church. They might remind you of something Father said in church that stuck with them that you forgot about. So I think this is extremely important. And opening discussion, the teenagers, when they're acting like they're not listening or they don't care. Okay, because what happens is, they don't want you to know that they really care. Mm-hmm. I remember this as this teenager. I was thinking about this the other night when my mother would come and talk to me, and I was like rolling my eyes because I didn't want her to know that I really did value her opinion. I really did, but I wanted to show that I didn't care. And so let them roll their eyes, let them say, oh, let them groan, let them whatever. This is what we're doing. This is our family time together. Let them protest, let them say, but I've got things to do, I've got homework, that's okay, you can do that after. Just calmly keep that ritual, however often is great if you could do it, seasonally during Lent, or every week if you can. But we do make time for things that matter. Mm-hmm. So we have to recognize that this really matters. And so let's make time for that. And children get a lot out of it, and the older children do too. So find a way to make that happen. I think that that's great. And the time that you get, the feedback that you can give them, the discussions that this opens up about other topics. And sometimes you find out about things that are happening in their lives. because you're sitting down to have a discussion about something, or it reminds them of something. This is like the story of this, and it will bring things out. Well, what about that? Have you faced a situation like that in school where, or is there a time when you prayed for something and you felt like your prayer wasn't answered? Well, what are we supposed to do? What is the story telling us? So I think it's fantastic because the Bible is about relationships between us and other people, us and God. So the more we can bring that out and open that up for family discussion and let our children ponder these things, that's good for them. It's good for us too. Not just about the kids. We need to be thinking about these things also.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that would be actually a really great thing to close on. As much as we would sit with our children and read the Bible with them, we also need to have time ourselves where we're engaging with the Bible on our own and reading the book. Any tips for that for busy parents finding time to read the Bible themselves?
Yes, I hear you. I think that, again, there are a lot of ways that we can incorporate the Bible into our lives. And as I mentioned, for me, one of the things I like is The Path. It's the podcast on Ancient Faith Radio. I will come into my office sometimes, click on the computer, click on The Path, and I'll listen to them read the daily readings, or I'll be in the car and I'll put on my smartphone. I have the app, and I'll listen to it in my commute. And that's just a real simple way. You don't have to sit down and read the whole chapter or read a whole book. It's that little dose, and it causes you to think. It's just reflective, it's meditative. As Christendom said, it attracts the grace of the Spirit. It puts us in a prayerful mindset, and we don't even realize that's the case. There's just so many ways that we can incorporate that. So we don't have to sit down with the Bible necessarily at the kitchen table and read it. There are other ways, thank God, that we can do it. There are CDs with the Bible we can play in the car. So there are other ways where you're standing in line at the bank, pull up the daily readings in the Go Arch app. It's a little cross, a little Byzantine cross. Press on it. You're reading the Bible reading of the day. Read the life of the saint of the day. So there's always time that we can fit in those little things. So I encourage people to do that. I think it's important for our spiritual life. Yes.
Wonderful. I can't thank you enough. This has been really, really helpful to me as a parent, and I'm sure it has been to others.
I hope so. Don't stop. Don't stop, parents. Don't stop talking. Go ahead.
We wish you the best with your continued podcast. I know I'm really enjoying that and learning a lot from it. And we just thank you very much. Again, to all of you listening, we hope that this is just a beginning of a conversation for you. And what we hope is once we get this up, the video, is that you can take it back to your parishes and sit down with the parents there and have some conversation, some real conversations about how you can engage with the Bible more in your families, in your homes. Even have the sit down with your spouse if they're not watching this with you, and watch and continue the conversation. So we hope that you can continue to use this and share it with others. We invite you next month to join us in October. We'll be sending out the information on both our listserv, or you can find it on our Facebook page. You can sign up for our listserv at www.family.goarch.org. You can sign up for our listserv. Our podcast, our webinar next month, will be around the topic of faith, families, fasting, nutrition, and we will have Rita Madden with us. She's an author, and we're looking forward to talking with her about these aspects of our spiritual development. Again, I can't thank you enough, President.
I thank you. Our hour just flew by. And I just want to encourage parents. I know you've got busy lives. I know you want the best for your kids. Every little bit helps. Every little bit helps. You never know how that lesson, that one little moment that you're spending with your child, the few minutes you sit to talk about these things, what an impact it has on them. Drip, drip, drip. Oh, every little bit helps. Okay? God bless. And thanks for inviting me. All the best.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.